You're listening to Off to Market with Scott Farley and Hamish Chadwick.
I'm Hamish.
And I'm Scot.
And this is the first podcast for 2020. And you'll notice that, yes, new music. I thought, why not? A bit of a cheesy intro I chose. Everyone's laughed at it so far. And also this is the first episode with a new audio recorder. I've stopped using my iPhone, which is a great thing because that was getting the limitations of that was getting a little bit annoying with background noise and things like that. So hopefully this will be coming to you a little bit clearer. Scott, you want to talk about the process or what it takes to be an entrepreneur?
Yes, it's one of those topics that is fairly personal, I guess, but very important. We've talked about a lot of knowledge-based ideas over the last 38 episodes, but really when it comes down to it, all the best ideas in the world will lead you nowhere if you really aren't prepared to go through what you need to do to be a startup or an entrepreneur.
So this is more going to be to do with the psychological aspect of being an entrepreneur.
Definitely. What I found that works for me doesn't work for everybody, but it certainly seems to be a common thread through successful entrepreneurs that I've met.
Yep.
And you know, when it comes right down to it, the underlying thing that I think is more prevalent than anything else is gumption. You know, you really have to dig in to do this stuff. You really have to live your life for it and focus in on it. It takes a lot of focus. It takes a lot of concentration to keep the track. It's almost like playing chess every day of your life. You make a decision, and it has to lead to the right outcome. And if you have to think about all the options because there are usually hundreds of options, and take the right one. So as in chess, you make the wrong move. It can cost you a lot of money in this business, or it can lead you to a failure, or it can lead you down the wrong path. But I mean, that's the whole point of having this network around us of good people that we've gathered over. That's one of my biggest assets is all my people around me, and we've tried to get
your pawns.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a real team effort.
Sorry, that was a joke.
I always put. I mean, that's half of this podcast is about sharing that information and getting people who know their stuff and can give you these golden nuggets that really are hard to find elsewhere and guide you to the right outcome. So,
well, also, can I just interject there? I think that's the other, what I've learned from working with entrepreneurs too, is some of them get information overload. And I think also too, they get advice overload. I'm working with someone at the moment and it's my opinion that he's getting advice overload. I think there are a lot of people in his ear, and I try always to keep that in mind when I'm talking to him, because I think I know where he's at. There's a lot going on. There's a lot being thrown at him. There's so much to deal with, and there's so many new concepts to think about. And everyone, let's face it, has an opinion. But I think the most important thing is to always, I'm sure that's what you're about to get into, is how do you centre that? How do you say, okay, well, what do I want? You've got so many people, whether it's an accountant, a lawyer, a marketing person, someone like me or someone like Scott. Yeah. We've all got our own experiences, but the problem with that is we can sometimes then, when we're having a quiet moment in our office or wherever it is, we think, oh my goodness, what do I do with all this information? I think that's probably one of the key areas where people have to be very certain what the outcome is, because then that will help you make your own decision based on what you want and your value system, if you want to put it that way. Yeah. But anyway,
good advisors is one of those things. I mean, the amount of times I've had graphic design companies look after graphic design for me, and the client loves it, they take it home, the wife hates it, and all of a sudden they're back in square one. Really, you have to rely on your advisors.
If we're looking,
so the advice you get, you got to filter it. Don't just take advice off anybody. If they haven't had experience in it, they're probably not going to be very wise. Some people just are very wise people, and they'll just say something that just gels with you. But if it doesn't gel with you, you've just got to prioritise your information input. I guess that's what you're saying too.
Well, I think too, again, I don't want to steal your thunder with all this. I can see you've got 1,000 notes there, which is valuable information. But if we go back to just that point about graphic design, and that relates to even things like naming and also brand design, is you have to have a brief. If you're going and asking a whole load of people outside of the project what their opinion is of that particular element or that particular strategy, if they've got no idea what the actual objective is that you're trying to achieve, well then all they can do is give you their personal opinion. So it's a bit like going into someone and saying, hey, look at this new piece of art. What do you think? Oh, I hate it, or it's crap, or it's, oh, I love it. Oh, I love the pink, or I don't like the pink. Well, hang on. What is the pink for? Is that there for a strategic reason?
Yeah.
Is that to do with a competitive colour wheel, for instance? And
Yep.
there's all these little elements that people have to consider that rather than going to people and asking for advice. Of course, ask everyone you can for advice if you want, but there should be a brief. Doesn't matter what you're doing. Design brief. Even with what you do, there is a design brief. You spend more time doing a brief than you would probably doing the project in the first few weeks of a project, because otherwise, what are you doing? You're just sort of designing something and going in 10 different directions.
Yeah, definitely. But my focus on this little podcast is more about setting yourself up for success as an entrepreneur. And, you know, are you the right person to be an entrepreneur? You know, the dictionary says an entrepreneur is a person who sets up a business or businesses taking on financial risks in the hope of profit. It's pretty sterile, but it's actually quite correct. You know, without risks. I mean, this is what probably differentiates a lot of people. And I've read articles about, you know, the history of entrepreneurs. Who were they when they were kids? And they found that a lot of entrepreneurs climbed trees as kids. They were risk takers to start with. So risk is a very big part of entrepreneurship. And if you're not really up to risk, and you know, my ex-accountant, he used to look at me and go, I don't know how you do this. You just must run on adrenaline every day. And I do. That's why my cholesterol's high, because I run on adrenaline. And there's physiological results of that. You're running on adrenaline because there's so many things to consider. Now, I do my own projects and clients' projects, so I've got their things to consider and my things. And all these decisions I have to make, same as the shares thing, they have to be correct. And, you know, you do make mistakes, but 99% of those decisions have to be correct, or you're costing people money, or you're costing yourself money. So there is a lot of pressure and a lot of stress. So I guess that's, if you're starting into an entrepreneurship, and we have been pretty pragmatic with our podcast, and I don't want to really scare people off being an entrepreneur, but I do want to make sure they know how to manage the process of being an entrepreneur and the sort of person it takes to be an entrepreneur.
I also think too, if I can just mention, I think entrepreneur as a word is thrown around far too much. I think there are a lot of people that just get into businesses and someone will call them an entrepreneur.
I'm not sure. I think there's a lot of people pushing forward in life, and maybe entrepreneur covers a lot of ground. Possibly.
Yeah. I know what I mean, but I'm not trying to discredit anyone that calls themselves. I think the other side of it too is I think it's one of those terms that the market eventually gives you. I don't think you wake up one day and say, that's what I want to be. My title is now entrepreneur. I don't think that's, in my experience, it's not how it works. Someone wakes up in the morning, if we want to simplify that story, and they say, I want to improve something, or I can see an opportunity in something, and they just get on with it.
Yeah.
Then the market might call them an entrepreneur after they've succeeded, but there's a lot of groundwork that's done. There's a lot of, like you're about to mention as well, there's a lot of things that have to fall into place. So that's the only reason I say it's bandied around. It's a bit like the silly term influencer, and I call it a silly term because some people say, I want to be an influencer. Well, you need content to be an influencer. You don't just call yourself an influencer and hope everything falls into place. You eventually become, that is the outcome. You know, if you do everything in a certain way that allows you to be seen as an influencer, which means people are contacting you and saying, I want you to help me with opportunity. Well, then yes, you are. But you don't just have, say, 50 followers and say, I'm an influencer. It's like, no, that's not how the world works. No. So I think that's where there is some misunderstanding there, or misuse of the term. I think it's
well, I think it is actually broader than that definition. I mean, another famous saying is, entrepreneurship is living a few years of your life like most people won't, so that you can spend the rest of your life living like most people can't. And so in that respect, even a sports person, somebody who puts a lot of energy in the background when they're not making any money at all, artists, all these people who really put a lot of, if you knew the process I went through to get my industrial design degree, there was so much effort and so much I put aside and sacrificed for that. That in itself was an entrepreneurship. People who spend all their lives as youths, running around the country making no money, playing amateur sport to become the very few elite to make money out of it. Singers, artists, band members, guitarists, all these people, they're taking a risk and putting aside and living, well below the poverty line sometimes, in order to eventually live on the other end of it. So that is an entrepreneurship as well, I think. But anyway, and there's so many things. 60% of businesses fail in the first 3 years. 97% of all patents never make money. 1%, and that's mainly because a lot of these things, there's 1% inspiration, and the rest of it's just bloody hard work. And if you haven't set yourself up for that, and your family, sometimes if you've got a family, like it's okay for you to live below the poverty line when you're single and you're younger, generally, in order to achieve something like that. But you have a family now, and you decide to become an entrepreneur, and you start putting all these, lifestyle habits in place that your family's not up to. That can cause a lot of pressure on a family. So I guess my thing here is pretty much to try and set yourself up in a way that like map out what's coming. If you're going to be an entrepreneur, you're going to do a startup, there's going to be so much focus required. It's going to take time off your family, and we are very like success in life. If you go through and you have a great entrepreneur venture and you win there and you lose your family, well, is that success? I'm not sure. I don't think it is. I think you have to try and balance, and if you give yourself a heart attack or an aneurysm from the stress, is that success? I'm not sure it is. So you want to try and keep the balance. For me, I have a very strong, I turn my phone off at 6 when I get home, and that's family time. I try not to think about work whenever I can when I'm with the family, because it can really be distracting. And I do try and balance, I do a lot of thinking, so I try and balance that with fitness. So I'm a very active person. I've always been an active person, and I find that is a very good stress reliever for me. I go out and just do things fairly extremely to try and balance the sitting in the office thinking all day. And I think those sort of balancing acts are very important for an entrepreneur. So I think if you can take that on board as a bit of advice from someone who's done this a lot and also seen a lot of it and seen people who are successful. A lot of the entrepreneurs who I know are successful have a very strong family life, and they focus on that. They're very good at segregating important things they can turn off. Very important. If you're going to be on holiday, be on holiday. Leave the phone off. Everything will be there when you get back. If you can, there's certain time, but you can't.
Well, I think that's the problem these days. You take your work is in your pocket.
It is,
days,
and it's
in
an
your
issue.
hand.
I must admit, we went on a family holiday beginning of last year, and I was working from 2 till 5 or 2 till 6, trying to get some things done. They just had to be done.
Yeah, and I think.
But then I turned off at 6. I was with the family. So.
But what you're saying there, though, I'm just to add to that. I don't think there's a problem if you take your work. Because the thing is, if you love doing it, then it's not. There's a whole thing of, is it actually work? So if you enjoy doing it and you've got a big project, let's face it, you can't just switch off completely for 2 weeks. That's insanity. You just can't. There's things coming in. There's things that have to be dealt with. But if you can, what you've said there is you simply structure it. As long as you have a structure, and the other important thing too is to have a good support network. So family or friends or people you can talk to. I was talking to someone, I think it was Alan Morris, who I was talking to last year. He admitted that and he hasn't got a problem. Great guy. Hi, Alan. But he said he regularly spoke to a psychologist just to keep him in line and keep him thinking about things, give him perspective. That's what it was for. Nothing else, just to get perspective.
Yeah.
So, and he's also got a mentor. I remember, and this is just coming back from, remembering what he was talking about. I think that, he works for other companies, but he himself is entrepreneurial, I suppose, in what he was doing, like you are, Scott. So he's got those checks and balances in place. I think that's the key thing to take away, is to have those checks and balances and a structure. So it's having that routine and having that discipline, but having the support. And I don't think they're all mutually exclusive. You have to have it all there. Yeah. It all has to be thrown into the pot.
Yeah, I'm a massive fan of mentorship. I like to surround myself with people who think the same way as me and doing the same, under the same sort of stresses and challenges, because then you don't feel as isolated. It's a very small group of people who actually, I guess entrepreneurs is probably a bigger group, but inventors particularly are a very, very small group of people. And if you can surround yourself by people who are similar in that respect, going through similar changes, you don't feel so isolated. So I think that's important. You've also, you've got to be doing it for the right reason. I've got a project that's 16 years old, and if I was doing that for money reasons, I would have canned it the first 6 months. But there's a real social change I want to implement to the world, and if I can achieve that in my lifetime, I'll be happy to have done that. So I think if you're just doing it, I mean, a lot of the entrepreneurs I deal with aren't doing it just for the money. They want to make an improvement in life, and then they've got to, their focus is far greater, and they've got a driver that allows them to see past all the small hurdles. So there's thousands of them, and you have to have patience. I mean, I'm a very impatient person. I want things to be done. I want to push and I drive and I push and I drive to the point where I've given myself serious issues in my past from stress. I've learned at 51 now to tame that down a little bit and realise what's important in my life. My mum, when I was very young, I had my first business when I was 10, and my mum used to say to me back then, just take a look around, slow down, chill out, you're young. And only now I'm just realising how right she was. But I do. I'm a very balanced sort of person now. I do enjoy everything in life, and I think that's very important. You can't just be about money or about a business or whatever. It's a very small part of your life. But also, you have to be patient. Most businesses that I've started or been involved with, it takes at least 2 years after getting your product to market, not just developing it. It might take you 2 years to develop it. 2 years after being on the market, selling your first product, to even start making a profit. There's just so much to learn, so much to implement, so much following together, so much momentum to gain, that within the first 2 years, and it can be, I've got friends who run a concrete truck, it can be 2 years of just trying to gather a database and people who know who you are. And then 5 years to make a profit. That is generally what happens in business. So if you're going out there and expecting to make money in 6 months and dump your job and do whatever, it's very, very unlikely that's going to happen. So I always say, I have the consultancy and I do my other projects. I've never quit my consultancy to do the other projects. I have to have cash flow, so keep your job.
Yep.
Maintain your job and run the project.
Yeah.
Don't give up your job, because you're not going to make money straight away.
It is funny you say that, because most of the entrepreneurs that I've worked with in the last 12 months have pretty serious day jobs as well as their invention, and I think those people have been, I've noticed some of them, that the ones that have given up their job immediately and jumped into what they think is going to be, make $1 million in the first 6 months, they're the ones that you find are very impatient and very stressed, because they've put all their eggs in one basket without a support network.
Yep.
And they fast learn. And obviously, you come across these people, you just end up coming halfway through their startup phase, if you like, and they're just realising that, oops, it's this is a long-term proposition. But
Yep.
the ones that have got their heads, I suppose, they're a little bit more stable in their thinking. They have kept their day job. That's what I've noticed. So that's another key thing there, is maybe that's what the balance is how can you do what you're proposing to do with keeping a stable income. So that's something definitely to look at. You don't have to just quit and then do something else. It's not black and white. You could maybe form a support network to help you, for like using someone like Scot, for instance, to say, okay, I don't have to sit here and stress about designing it myself. I can hand some of that off. Can I do that? And I think that's a very important part, is to relinquish some of that control, if you like, is to try and involve people, because that's really the way to push things forward.
I think that the most successful projects I've seen, they planned ahead, they made a budget for it, and then they fulfill it, and they become the director. They direct people who know what they're doing. It's really good to have a plan. You can't really do a business plan at this point. It's just all speculative or new. So expect change to happen. Don't expect things to go as you wish. Man plans, God laughs. It's so true in this industry. This is not black and white stuff. It's not like, you've got a mathematical theory to follow and you're going to, end up with 2 at the end of 1 + 1. You have to follow a path, and the path will deviate as you learn from the market what you're trying to achieve. And
I was just going to say, I think that's what you have to embrace, is everything that you do, you almost have to measure its effectiveness based on what you get back from it. So it's that cause and effect. So if you, for instance, a lot of people will put all their eggs into one basket and say, I've put an email out to my database and I didn't get a good response. So that's obviously, it's failed. It's like, well, no, hang on. You've just done one email, or you've done one Facebook campaign, and you didn't get the response. Well, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. You just keep moving. And same with even putting a product into the marketplace. Yep. You've done everything you possibly can to make sure that it's going to work. However, what I've seen, and obviously, Scott, you can comment on this too, is you really have to use the 80-20 rule. So you can't do that, obviously, if you're patenting something. It has to be spot on. But what I mean is, you've got to launch it, And all the marketing strategy and all the branding that you've done may have to be adjusted as you move forward, because the market will respond to what you've put on the shelf. And then you have to move with that. You've got to listen carefully. Again, this is taking advice. This is taking unsolicited advice.
Yeah.
But with the market, they're the ones with the money. They're the ones that will either give you their money or not. Yeah. And you've got to work. You've got to be reading that market all the time and saying, okay, what are they responding to? What are they not responding? How can we improve as we go? So nothing's black and white. There's no sort of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 step, and that's it. We're rich. It's you go from step 1 to step 3, back to step 2. We're launching. Might have to go back to step 3 again and adjusting things. Then go back to step 5 on the shelf, and then just keep moving around and seeing how you can always incrementally improve. Yeah. But just do it, but learn and move as you have to. So.
Yeah, we sort of have a fail early.
Oh, that's right. That's what you
adjust. It really is important. It's okay to get the wrong answer and then adjust. You must adjust to it, especially with marketing.
Marketing is easy to adjust. That's the thing. I think that's why I should really clarify is product design, not so easy to change. Like tooling is not, if you're looking at it from that perspective, obviously not easy to change tools or cheap, but marketing can certainly be changed.
And that's why we fail early in all the concept development, all the research. We make sure that by the time we get to tooling, we've done all our checks and balances, and hopefully at that point, you'll always learn something from the market once you produce a product and put it on the market. They might like the colour, they might change things, but they're not major changes. Hopefully at that point, you've done enough research to make sure you're on the right track. Yeah. Yeah, so I guess these sort of things aren't talked about very often. Stress can be a big part of this thing. I've actually, it wasn't the main factor, but there's, one of my clients had a divorce through the pressure of doing what she was doing. Mm-hmm. It wasn't, as I said, wasn't the main factor, but it certainly contributed. So the stress levels can be very high. People, built a house. That's a fairly simple thing to do when you consider how many times houses have been built, and yet you see budgets blowing out and time frames blowing out by double. You imagine trying to develop something that's never been done before. You have to be patient and have to accept that it's not always going to go as planned, and just roll with the punches. You have to learn, that manufacturers are getting it wrong. I've just had 37,000 parts made for myself. I've been doing this for 20 years and more, and they're all incorrect. And I've specified everything correctly. It's all out of my control. And you know what? I can get all upset and jump up and down, and it'll do me nothing but give me an ulcer. Yep. And so I just have to roll with the punches, adjust my expectations, and make it work longer term.
And I think that's where the real stress comes from. Is if, like you said before, if you're creating something which has never been done before, or you're doing it in a completely different way, every day you're operating in the dark. So you've got to get used to operating in the dark, or using a very small torch in a very dark, large room. Is that you're not going to be able to see everything. Not everything's going to be immediately. You're not going to be able to get clarity on everything straight away. Exactly. And I think that's what you've got to be prepared for in a lot of these exercises. Is you have to be comfortable operating in the dark. So you've got to feel your way. Yeah. Not everything's going to be obvious. And if you go and ask questions to some people, like I've seen so many times, as you say, oh, well, you're lost. And you say, well, oh, geez, what do you think about this? I'm operating in the, you don't say that, but, I'm operating in the dark. What do you think? Oh, and they'll say, well, this is my perspective, this is my take on it. But they're coming in on something that you've been thinking about every single day for maybe a year, and all of a sudden you're getting all this advice. You've got to be very careful with how you use that advice. So certainly you can get some ideas from it, but you've got to trust your gut instinct. I think that's what I've learned myself, is you've got to, often your gut instinct is pretty good. Depending on how much experience you've got, you can sort of say, okay, that's...
I think it comes back down to, from the brief you talked about before, if you know what you're actually trying to achieve, then the information be a sponge, absorb as much information, and things will ring true to the brief. Yeah. If they're ringing true to what the brief is, and that's based on what the market wants, then you're on track. And if you're hearing things and not ringing true, they won't sit with you. And so, that's how you use your filter, I guess. Always go back, and that's why I think we talked about before. The way I start a project is I find out what the market needs, define those things, what we're trying to achieve, and just lock them into my memory. That is then the cornerstone for everything I do after that. And the same thing goes with your project. You're trying to achieve this, and everything you hear will either ring true to that or not. So you've got to be careful and learn the filter, put the filter on for that outcome.
Yep, excellent.
Excellent. Well, that's good. I think we might put it up there. Otherwise, we'll
Sure.
bore
We're
people,
at,
but it's good.
24 minutes, and it's
There
only
you
the
go.
first episode of the year. So,
Got away with it.
yeah. So we'll talk to you next week.
Magic.
You've been listening to Off to Market with Scott Farley and Hamish Chadwick.